Welcome to the Project Zion podcast. This podcast explores the unique spiritual and theological gifts Community of Christ offers for today's world.
Welcome to the 30th episode of Coffee Buzz, a podcast conversation with a member of Community of Christ First Presidency. My name is Linda Booth. Each month, I host Coffee Buzz. I also provide episodes for Coffee Connect, where I tell God with Us stories that I've collected over the years, serving as a Community of Christ apostle. I'm retired now, but once a minister, always a minister, and once an apostolic witness, always an apostolic witness. And I still have a passion for Christ's mission around the world. Today, I'm talking with my good friend, Scott Murphy. Scott also has a passion for Christ's mission, and Scott serves as a member of the First Presidency, a counselor to Prophet President Steve Vesey, and director of field ministries. He supervises and supports members of the Council of 12 Apostles. Welcome, my friend. How are you, and how's your family?
Hi, Linda. It's good to be back with you again today. I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm doing well, keeping extremely busy. And so that, I guess that would keep me out of trouble at some level. But yeah, and my family's doing well. All of them seem to be staying healthy and, busy in their own careers and that. So I'm really grateful for how well each of them and their families are doing too.
Yes, absolutely. And all of us have been watching the news and watching the horrific images of the war in Ukraine and all the disaster and the people in anguish and fleeing. And so I'm going to start off by asking, how are our members and leaders doing in Ukraine and Russia, our staff and those families?
Well, I think as you know, Linda, and as our listeners could probably understand, I mean, these are situations that it's hard to even put into words the array of emotions and fears and concerns and that are taking place in people's lives. I just recently, earlier this week, had a check-in with Apostle Richard James, who is the apostle that serves the Eurasia field. Richard, gave me an update that he is keeping in contact with, in the best way he can, with some of our members. One of our past retired ministers and leader in Ukraine, he and his wife had been living in the church apartment that we have there in Ukraine in Kyiv, but that apartment is up on the fourth floor, and it did not have any basement, and so it was really for both he and his wife a very vulnerable place with the bombing taking place in that. So Richard had shared with me that Efim and his wife have been able to relocate to another building where there is a basement. So when the bombings are taking place, they can at least have better protection, in the lower level of the building. So we're grateful for that they were able to find another place to go for further support. But again, you can only begin to imagine the level of stress and anxiety that they live with every minute of the day, wondering what's going on. The reports that Richard have provided is that many of our other members have been fortunate enough to be able to get out of the country at this point. One mother and her children were able to get out and are now in Poland and are considering what their next steps are going to be. Some who have had connections with church members from World Conference and that have made connections in Europe that way. We have some members who were in the Odessa area have made their way to northern Italy to be with friends and connections that they had in northern Italy. and learned that our members in Germany, a number of them have started to open their homes to receive people in their homes, refugees coming in. So they're just offering a tremendous ministry to people's lives, both church members and or not, as just a safe place for people and families to be. So so there's, again, there's the blessings that people have been able to get out. So it's a blessing that they're away from the risk and all of that. And yet at the same time, their hearts just ache for their homeland and, the images that they constantly see on the news of the decimation taking place of the land and property. Our Richard also indicated that our members in Russia have expressed their deep concern about what is taking place too, and their sadness about their friends and people that they've shared time with from Ukraine, and some of them have even up in the Siberia area have even participated in protest, and so they tried to put their faith and trust on the line and stand up and say this is not okay. Fortunately, we have other members who live in closer areas of proximity to military bases in Ukraine, and that just raises further concerns about their risk of being too vocal or saying too much. And so just, understanding all of those dynamics that individuals in Russia are having to deal with too, and the consequences for them, their choices when they begin to speak out. So still a really difficult area and difficult time. But we give thanks for the glimpses of hope that occur and the safety that some people are in. And yet we recognize that some of our church member families are now separated because the males have been retained in Ukraine to continue to fight. So
yes. In times like this, we understand the need for prayer and for love and compassion, and it's good to hear the stories of those who are compassionately supporting. Not just our members, but all those who are
all fleeing. Those, yeah. And I would, probably add too here that the presiding bishopric is exploring the possibility of a special offering to be raised to continue to support, the people of Ukraine and that in that area. So as we anticipate, other oblation, needs in the poverty and even to the point when individuals and church members might be able to return home, there's going to be a lot of rebuilding taking place. And so, the PB and the presidency was having conversation yesterday. And so some further considerations will be looked at, and encourage the listeners to, be, watching for announcements that come out on social media and other ways on the church's website.
Thank you, Scott, for that update. And we do join together in prayer for all of our sisters and brothers in Ukraine and in Russia. Scott, you and I recently attended a celebration of life for our dear friend and colleague, Cindy Thomas, who supported the Council of 12 in the presence of 70, and at times even the first presidency and presiding bishopric office as an administrative assistant. She served with us for 6 years.
Yeah.
One of the elements of the celebration that she planned was to have Apostle Bunde Chibwe lead the congregation in a lively closing hymn. And he couldn't attend because he was in the Republic of Congo. So he sent a video of the congregation singing and dancing, which was a wonderful way to end Cindy's celebration of life. Are more and more apostles and world church ministers traveling worldwide? Is the coronavirus pandemic still impacting travel?
Well, Linda, as you know from your years of experience of serving with the Council of 12 Apostles and even in your role as president of the Council of 12, it's hard to hold back some of those apostles who feel that call to get out into their fields and bear witness and work with the people and all of that. And some of our apostles who serve in the multi-nations parts of the world outside the U.S., they're some of the worst. And so, as you've indicated, Apostle Bunda Chibwe, after a couple of years, he was just chomping at the bit to get out there. So, I have recently supported some apostles to do some traveling in their field where COVID levels have been on the decline. And so, Bunda has been traveling and is currently traveling in his fields in nations in Africa. Catherine has been doing some traveling, trying to support the mission there. Carlos in Central America has traveled within Honduras. I don't believe that Carlos has really traveled outside yet the nations, and some of those nations in Central America haven't completely opened in that regard. So, so that's happening, and so we're just trying to take it, a step at a time, and trying to be mindful of that. There, even when working with Bunda, I've had to say these are some places where I'm supportive of you going, but these other places where COVID levels are still so high, as we monitor, the CDC and the World Health Organization monitoring status in those kind of places. And so that is happening. Have conversations with other apostles where we've determined that after looking at the data, that it's probably not wise yet to travel to some of those locations, which is, again, it's a difficult thing to say that, because there is that desire to be with the people. And yet at the same time, we have to understand that it's not only the apostle who puts himself at risk, but, if they're traveling like that, and the potential of bringing a form of COVID or something into a location where people are meeting, we just don't want to put people at risk in that way, when there's still opportunity to connect with people online in other ways. And again, I try to be very mindful that, for any of us called into full-time ministry, we're called to go and bear witness and all of that. But it's important that we have to be respectful of their families too. I do not want to put, world church leaders' families at risk in that regard. So it's this balance of trying to care for, both the family, the personal needs, and the needs of the community in that regard. So we are slowly learning how to move safely back to the levels of travel and activity in responsible ways. So we keep working at that. And, we are now anticipating that the World Church Leadership Council will return to its first in-person meetings in May. So we've told them to plan for that. That's what we're planning to, but yet we're monitoring and watching some of the latest, news coming up with the new variant of the COVID, that if it continues to rise in unhealthy ways, then we may have to pull back from that. So we'll see where that continues to go. But we're trying to be wise stewards of all of that, and we'll just monitor it each time.
Yes, of course. The pandemic may have slowed some opportunities to advance Christ's mission, but it certainly didn't stop the Spirit from reaching out to people in need, and Community of Christ members, priesthood, and leaders bringing ministry to advance Christ's mission. Please share some examples of how Christ's mission continued even in the midst of the pandemic.
Well, as you and I have talked in the past about this, Linda, the pandemic has been an exhausting challenge. Mm-hmm. But in the midst of that, there still have been some amazing things that have emerged that I believe have resulted out of what we've encountered during the extended pandemic. And in some ways, again, as we have talked, as the presidency talks and the World Church Leadership Council, there's things that have been accelerated because of this that have forced us into new ways of being together, new ways of looking at being the church and how to live that out. So here are some of the things that really continue to stand out for me as the church's response and how we continue to live Christ's mission. Mission centers in the U.S. and Western nations, for me, have become extremely creative in how people have shared together online. So the way that they've come together in, worships on Sunday or midweek small group gatherings have been incredible. Things like book clubs have been started to form small group ministries focused on topics like racial justice and environmental concerns and spiritual formation. The book clubs for children that have been developed, and getting children online together to share, with adults who offer that support to develop their discipleship formation, is incredible. The presidency was just meeting yesterday with Dave Anderson, who serves as the High Priest Quorum president, and Dave talking about, these gatherings that the high priests have had online to explore topics like metamorphosis coming out of, President Veazey's, work and vision. Dave was sharing with us that the High Priest Quorum have now developed book clubs that have just enriched the opportunity of conversations. And these book clubs are with people from across the U.S. and some of the, Canada and some of the other nations. And there is now a book club occurring with high priest over in Europe. And again, Dave is able to participate that, and it's just those moments when you realize, nothing like that was really taking place before the pandemic. I mean, mission centers might have had some book clubs or people doing some things like that, but it was always with people in your own congregation or mission center. Now we have people coming together from across the nation or multiple nations. And I just think that that's such an incredible expression and reminder of who Community of Christ is as a global community. We are always more than just our local congregation or our mission center. And so those are really some fun things. I may have mentioned this in the past because I think this one's really unique, but there's one mission center that's been doing online group ministry with youth and adults that have been formed around the video game Minecraft. So I'm aware of the video game. I've never really played it, but it's a game about building things. And so adults and youth are working together and again, people from across the U.S., joining together, building things together. And it wasn't this last Christmas, it was the Christmas of 2020 that they had a contest of building Christmas tree scenes together. And I was invited to be one of the judges, the guest judges, to come in and see all of the different creations of these groups that were made out of these teams. And again, it's just a different way of bringing people together in meaningful relationships. So we have our first online congregation that was established from, people from, Western Europe, New Zealand, and other locations that are now formed as a new online congregations. There's mission centers have joined together for shared activities and ministries that really have increased their participation. And even the question to say, should those two mission centers merge into one mission center? Many stories of people who have drifted away from, the local congregations over the years have reconnected online. I also love the fact, and I know that you've encountered this too in your own experience online, but it happens frequently for me where I'm invited to share in ministry with a congregation someplace across the US or Canada or other places, and I get online and there's people from a different nation or a completely different mission center. And I'm thinking, what are you doing here? And it's just because they've had relationships with those people that they feel comfortable to be able to get online and be a part of that community. Again, another wonderful expression of the power of relationships. And the pandemic in some ways has broken down the geographical walls and barriers of proximity, and online been able to create these connections. And I just love what that has done. And I'm just grateful for people who have made that possible for congregations and mission centers, and the good work that Beyond the Walls and other areas have done that have really created these wonderful connections for people in the church.
Yes, absolutely. And when you mentioned Beyond the Walls, that's out of Toronto, and that congregation's enormous. And they've created resources for the whole church of music, hymns being sung, a beautiful repertoire of all these hymns that their choir has sung that other congregations can use. So resources have been developed, and it does absolutely go on. And I've been at several worship services online where a child was participating, and their grandparents who lived across the country also were able to participate in that worship service and be a part of their grandchild's ministry, which they wouldn't have been able to do before.
Exactly.
So it is truly astounding. So you and I have been preaching quite a bit on Zoom the last few years, and I've noticed the last 6 months or so that even when I preach on Zoom, many of the congregation have become hybrid congregations, meaning I can see on the screen that some people are present in the sanctuary while others are joining the worship online like me. And quite honestly, next Sunday is the very first Sunday I'm preaching inside a sanctuary, which will be a very unusual experience. What do you believe congregations and World Church ministers have learned about ministry and worship and mission because of the pandemic? You've touched on it a little, but there's some specific learnings that the World Church Leadership Council or Council of 12 or First Presidency have noted?
Yeah, so I think I want to really name two very specific ones. Recently, I was having lunch in a good conversation with an evangelist that Bill Barnhard.
Yes.
Our listeners, Bill is a retired full-time minister with the church and a member of the World Church Leadership Council, was the director of human resources for the church for a number of years. And Bill and I, had actually met here at the temple and brought lunch together and was just catching up on life and engaging in some conversations. But it was in the midst of that, talking and sharing that Bill was sharing with me one of the learnings for him that has come during this pandemic, and that has been the importance and the need to focus on relationships. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely agree with Bill.
Yeah.
So one of the areas that we need to continue to give attention to as congregations and as groups begin to move back to, in-person or hybrid models, as you've just talked about, Linda, is this: people are yearning for meaningful connections and relationships that enrich their lives. It's been a lonely time in some ways, and people are truly looking to be back in connecting with one another. And that doesn't always mean just in person, but connecting in meaningful ways. And when you think about it, the gospel is the good news of Jesus Christ, who was constantly in meaningful relationships with people that allowed them to explore their own lives and to feel loved and safe to work towards the changes needed for wholeness. So one of the critical learnings is this coming as a probing question in our current models of what in-person church is giving attention to. If I'm to be honest, when you actually think about it, the current models of our Sunday morning worships don't provide a lot of meaningful connection opportunities. When you think about this block of time that's filled with an order of worship that is usually being delivered to you, there's really minimal time for people to truly engage in connection in each other's lives. And so I'm finding myself really wrestling with this question of how do we begin to broaden our understanding and models of worship and being together that can be more engaging and connecting? How do we understand worship not as something that we do, but worship as an experience that is present within us and with us? And what if people have a limited time of being together during a week, then how do we best utilize that time of creating opportunities for people to be together, to share together, to explore together the journey of discipleship, the messiness of life, to understand how do we continue to live our hopes and be faithful in the midst of that messiness and the pains that we see around the world. So those are the kind of questions that I'm raising coming out of this. And so as a church, how do we give ourselves permission to continue to explore different ways of being together, if it's online or if it's in person or if it's a hybrid? So that's an important learning for me. And as I've engaged with the presidency, as I've engaged with, members of the Council of 12, those are relevant questions that I believe that we need to be searching and exploring and talking about and giving ourselves permission to experiment with different ways to bring people together that may offer a different way of being together in worship in those sacramental experiences. Another important learning that I know you get to that is really elevated during the pandemic is the reality that the church building is not the church.
Yes.
So some amazing things have occurred among congregations who have gathered in the spirit of joy and love, and thinking truly about community, and coming to the realization that having a church building isn't a requirement for being a loving community. And in fact, I think what pleases me is that there are some congregations in some different parts in different mission centers in the context of the U.S. right now, at least, that have engaged in some serious conversations with each other about bringing their congregations together into one location and forming a new congregation. And this is more than just saying, yeah, let's merge our congregations together. The research is pretty clear that, just merging congregations, it isn't successful. But when something can be birthed to be open to birthing a new congregation, then there is a better chance of something that can really be inspiring and grow. But at least at a minimum, what's happening is that congregations they're stepping back and saying, when they're in close proximity to each other, within a 20, even 30-minute proximity, they're saying, why are we trying to maintain, 3 different buildings when we could come together into one and free ourselves up from the burden of time and money and energy trying to just deal with the building issues. So that is an important learning. And again, I know that you have seen this, too, Linda, but I mean, there's things happening across all denominational entities around this that are saying people are coming to the realization that if mission is really going to happen, then they need to free themselves up from the time, the money, and energies of just maintaining a building, and really direct their resources of person and finances towards truly living mission. And so that's happening across the board. And so I think that's been a tremendous learning too, coming out of the pandemic, that we have to give attention to, and don't know where that will go, but that will happen. So those are just, with our limited time, those are just really 2 important learnings that for me continue to stand out. And I expect that over time, as we kind of now step forward into new ways of being, that hindsight will continue to offer us further insights and learnings that will emerge and will help us raise questions that we need to wrestle with and explore about what it means for the church, living that mission in a new way as communities of members and friends. So we'll it's a constant process of just trying to be open to some of those aspects.
Exactly. And there have been new opportunities for relationships that have emerged during the pandemic. I'm not sure that I would have been invited to lead a women's support group with 2 women ministers in the Philippines and 2 in South Korea and 1 in Nepal without everyone's experience and comfort level with Zoom. And that monthly meeting has really been a blessing to us as we've prayed together and encouraged one another. And that's led to an invitation for me to speak at the Philippines priesthood gathering about joy in ministry. President Vesey and I are both taping messages to be viewed by those priesthood members. But before the pandemic, President Vesey probably would have been traveling to Manila. Do you anticipate that World Church leaders will be traveling less because of Zoom and other technologies? Or do you believe that the benefit of being with people will cause extensive travel by leaders and ministries to resume?
Yeah, it's a good question, Linda. The probably the simplest answer is I think it's going to be a balance of both. Being with people in person is important, but I also think we have to be careful not to somehow imply that in-person connections is always better than being together over Zoom, and that's a delicate piece that we have to be mindful of, because it can, we do have the tendency at time to say, yeah, it's better to be in person, or we treat in person as a higher quality than being together on Zoom as a lower quality. And I understand that for some people that may be the case, but that's not the case for everyone. So connecting over Zoom or online allows for just different ways of being together. And so I'm thinking, just as I listen to your question, taking your example that you just mentioned, if about being with the people and the women in the Philippines and South Korea and all of that, if you would have had to travel to be with those women, you could have done that, but you would have been just with them for a short time and then gone. Yeah. And chances are you may never have traveled back there again. But through online connections, your support can be extended over a longer period of time, and you have the opportunity to not only be with the women in the Philippines, but you could bring all of those women together and share together and create that support group together as an expanded community. So I think it's important for the listeners to understand that there are places in the world that are communal in nature. So again, we look at, many of the African nations, the members in that in India and in other locations, those are just strong communal cultures, and being together in person is very important. But there's other places in the world that are less communal, and connecting one-on-one in, either in person or online is a more preferred way of being together. And so part of this is just trying to be sensitive to the cultural dynamics, and how do we work through that and provide in the best way we can those connections and relationships in what fits within the cultural dynamics. The World Church leaders, we talk about travel and that. The World Church leaders are also trying to be really responsible financially with the church's resources. And as we've had more conversation, we're trying to be responsible to care for the earth. So we recognize that when we are traveling, especially by air, we contribute to the growing carbon emissions footprint in our environment. So each time we choose not to travel by air, we're saving money for the World Church budget that can be used, in other ways. But we're also choosing not to contribute to the carbon footprint that we understand is impacting environments around the world. As the World Church Leadership Council has discussed and decisions that we've made for our listeners, the World Church Leadership Council meets at least 3 times a year. We meet for at least a week in January, a week in May, and then in September. And then the Council of 12 and Presidents of 70 usually meet the second week during those times. So it's really a block of 2 weeks when church leaders and quorums, meet. So we have made the decision to move to a different model where we are looking at, in our annual meetings, 2 of those meetings will be in person, and 1 of those meetings will be online. And we're doing that intentionally. First of all, to meet in person gives us more time to be together, because when we are meeting online, for our listeners to understand, Apostle Mareva Arnaud lives in French Polynesia, and Apostle Catherine Momboy lives the furthest east in Zambia. The time spread between those 2 extremes is a 12-hour time difference. So when it's 7 a.m. in the morning for Mareva, it's 7 p.m. at night for Catherine. So we're limited when we're meeting online. We're limited to about a 3-hour block of time here in Independence and Central USA time. So we meet from 12 noon till 3 in the afternoon, which again starts at 7 a.m. for Catherine or Mareva, but starts at 7 p.m. for Catherine. So, poor Catherine, by the time we're done, it's going on, 10 o'clock, or later for her. And she's getting pretty tired. And when Bunda's traveling over there too, both of them, you could see their heads sometimes drooping there. So we're trying to, be sensitive to that. So to meet twice a year in person gives us more time to go in depth in that way. But we've also made a choice that meeting online once a year in those 3 times is a response to being responsible to our budget and trying to save money. And it's also a way for us to say we will not travel and help to do best we can to not contribute to, further carbon, emissions that way in the extensive travel. When you multiply all of the people who have to travel from outside the U.S. to come in even within the U.S. So that's our commitment at this point, and how we're trying to respond to those dynamics.
Well, that's really important. It is, Scott. You've mentioned World Church Finance Board, and I thought of that in relationship to one of my favorite agenda items during the Council of 12 meetings was when we would share mission stories with one another, and we would hear our colleagues talk about the good things happening in their mission fields. And it was inspiring and confirming that we were all living Christ's mission. And the same was true at that World Church Finance Board meeting, the ones that are delegates, so to speak, or representatives of the church from all over the world who gathered to talk about the budget. And those board members were really attentive to the budget reports and even during the discussions. But you could see the joy on their faces when apostles shared the good news from the fields of the church. So, Scott, please share some of those mission stories you've been hearing from apostles and others who serve and lead first in developing nations.
Yeah, I agree with you, Linda. Those mission moments with the finance board are always the real highlights. So let me share some of these, and again, I'm trying to be respectful of time and that, but let me share some things that I'm just really pleased with. So I'm going to start with Catherine and Bunda, who served the 2 African fields. So they have developed a 5-year mission plan, and that was developed in collaboration with Apostle Ron Harmon, who's president of the Council of 12, and myself as director of field ministries. And one of the emphasis for Catherine and Bunda in their African fields is to really give attention to further developing disciples to live mission. And in addition to that, there has been a major emphasis about the empowerment of women to serve as priesthood and to be leaders in many of the congregations throughout Africa. So it recently, back at the end of the 2021, was meeting with Catherine and Bunda and just kind of looking at, what had really occurred during the past year and what they were able to achieve even in the midst of the pandemic. So here's some things that really stand out. Catherine organized and held a women's gathering in Malawi, and over 200 women were able to come and participate in that event. And when they took pictures, I just absolutely loved seeing the image and the scene on their faces, their laughter, their smiles and joy. And it was just a blessing, but it was about them. They could be them as women and be empowered. Bunda and Catherine have also been spending time in disciple and leadership development. And there has been a number of women who have been called to serve as priesthood in the life of the church that are truly making a difference. And Linda, you know this better than any of us, that when mission is focused on the empowerment of people's lives, positive things begin to happen.
Yes. So
get this. In one mission center this last year, they had over 107 baptisms. And another mission center, 172 baptisms that were recorded. And another small mission center, 76 baptisms, another 50 baptisms, and another 86, another 94. Out of their vision in mission, 8 young peacemaker clubs have been established in Malawi, which is one of the poorest nations in the continent of Africa. Think about that. 8 peacemaker clubs that are being run now by volunteers, by women leaders, that are empowering, impacting children and youth in special ways about peace in their life. 4 clubs have been established so far in Zambia, and Catherine expects there to be more. They have hired a youth minister in Zambia who is connecting online with youth in Zambia, in Malawi, in Kenya, and bringing youth together in those special ways, which is really powerful. So there's just some incredible things taking place, and that is what Bund is over there doing now in his field. Is just doing training. He just left the Congo DR after doing a couple weeks of training with leaders and really developing the identity and mission of Community of Christ and empowering them to continue to grow. And the church is growing and expanding in those two fields. A couple weeks ago, the church in India experienced the ordination of the first woman called to the priesthood office of 70.
Ah, wonderful.
Linda, this is, and for our listeners, this, from our cultural context, this may not sound like much, but for this culture and for this community, that, these tribal cultures in India, and we've been present in India for over 50 years now. This is a significant sign of the changes being made as the value of women are upheld in the identity, mission, and message of Community of Christ.
Wow. And
soon, 2 more women in another part of India, in another mission center, will be ordained to the priesthood office of 70. I wish I could show the viewers the image, the pictures that were sent to me of the gathering, but there are, and you've seen these images before, Linda, there's hundreds and hundreds of church members who came from the different villages, gathered under their tents that they create in their just glorious colors in their dress. And you look out on this multitude of people gathered for this special occasion of the first woman ordained to the office of 70. That is
marvelous.
That is mission at the heart of changing people's lives.
Yes.
Other mission projects are focused on, and I'm really excited about some of this in the work that the Council of 12 has done with their leadership with Abolish Poverty and End Suffering, and their work with the funds in the budget dedicated to world hunger. A congregation in Mikado, which is a part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, has taken funds that we've been able to grant to them, and they have developed a vocational training center for young women in the practical training of cutting and sewing techniques. This training center, as a part of the mission center, provides women a trade and a skill that will empower them to now go and start their own businesses or gain employment. And this place where this Macondo, I hope I'm saying that right, is one of the poorest areas of the city in the Congo there where they're at. And because of this level of poverty, the education and training of children, and particularly girls and women, it is so minimal. And so what this church now in congregation is doing with the grants that we've been able to provide is creating this opportunity for women to be empowered to do something and take control in their own lives. So that's just another example. Is some grants were made in another, I'm trying to think where this was at, but it was in Bundesfield, but they've created a business of making bricks. And so the job is creating not only bricks, but they're creating opportunities for families to generate income, to feed themselves. I could go on. I could talk about the sugarcane fields or the plantations that we've provided for generating ongoing income for families. The water, the borehole water systems that we've been able to put in, not only for church members, but it's for the whole community. And so here, Community of Christ it's the message to say, we care about you and we want you to be healthy. And so those are just some powerful expressions of what are taking place in some of the nations. I was recently in conversation with Apostle Reva Arnaud, who I have She is now serving as the Mission Center president for French Polynesia again, coming out of they really were hit hard during the pandemic. And I told Mareva, I said, I want you to go back in there. I want you to be the leader of mission. She is so busy right now because the church live with just the congregations are coming alive. They're reaching out. They're doing things. They're working out into the community. And I know you know that culture. And it's been a blessing to hear the stories and the excitement that's been taking place and all of the volunteer leaders that are making things happen. So there's really some really exciting things happening as life is starting to, take on and people are coming and participating more. And I'm just really grateful for what the church and the message of the church out in these nations are doing.
Well, I've been smiling and tears of joy in my eyes as you shared these stories. And I'm sure our Coffee Buzz listeners also probably, I wish we could see their faces, Scott, just like the World Church Finance Board members whose faces just lit up as you tell the stories of Christ's mission being lived out. Any mission stories from those countries, those Western nations, which is a little bit different?
Yeah. Here's a few. So on Monday, I was meeting with leaders from the Australia leadership team, and they at the beginning, as we were just getting started, they were sharing with me about the family camp that they had just come from over the weekend as an extended weekend, kind of their first camp that they've been able to have back in person. But they said what was amazing was the number of people who chose to come to be and participate in that. And even more amazing, the number of people who had probably not participated in the life of church for 20 years.
Wow.
Had come. And they said there was something so special at that camp. And again, as I spoke earlier, the time to be together in meaningful relationships that just brought a spiritual depth and nurturance to all of the people who participated. And when that family camp experience ended, people's lives were just touched. Mm-hmm. And I could just see it on the faces of Ben and Adam as I was, sharing with them, and they were sharing with me just how deeply blessed that they were feeling to have been able to participate and experience that. So that was just a wonderful story for me. I think in my work with Richard and some of the listeners may have heard this before, but I think it's still just a powerful example that there's been a real focus in recognizing that in the Western Mission Center, and specifically in France, the nation of France, that there's been a number of members from French Polynesia who have relocated there for work and education and other things, but didn't have the connection with the church there. And real intentional efforts by one individual, a 70 who is from French Polynesia, who has made a 2-year or more commitment to come and volunteer, is now spending time in France and reconnecting with those people. Wow. And they have started to meet together. And even more exciting is now, because of the online opportunities, when they come together for the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, they're joining with congregations in French Polynesia to share those times together. So they're not only connecting as a community of members and friends there in French, but they're also connecting with friends and family back in French Polynesia. So some wonderful things are emerging in Europe in that way. Again, I just want to highlight this because I am so pleased and just so grateful for the missional response occurring from our members in Germany who have opened their homes. So they have reached out, they've notified Richard. They're working through the systems to say if there are church members or even other refugees who need a place to stay, they're opening their home, offering a bed, food, protection. And so this is just a absolutely perfect example of mission of Christ through the compassionate action and ministries into the welfare of those who are broken and hurting. And so I just want to continue to uphold that. Recently, one of our leaders, Ryan Pitt, who was a mission center president in the Mid-Atlantic Mission Center, took time to travel. I believe it was in New York, to where at the early part of the war in Ukraine was happening. The Parliament of World Religions made the decision to hold a special prayer service at the beginning of the war. And Ryan, again, one of our leaders, one of our members, took the time to travel over there to where the actual gathering of ministers and leaders from different faiths around the world were gathering for prayer together. And I love this picture that Ryan had sent, that he was standing with ministers from the array of faith traditions that had participated. And it was this powerful moment, realizing to see that Community of Christ, the church, was present for that special service through Ryan's presence, but through the participation of many, Apostle Barb Carter and many others who had participated online in that service. But Ryan was the physical presence of Community of Christ to say, we are with you. We are a part of the global community of faith who are coming together. And that it was a moment for the witness of who Community of Christ is and our enduring principles of the worth of all persons and the blessings of community. And that was a proud moment for me in what Ryan did in saying it's important enough for Community of Christ to be in this place. So, yeah, there's a variety of other things taking place. Groups, mission centers, the Greater Pacific Northwest, the British Isles Mission Center are sharing together in climate change webinars that they're spending time really trying to empower people to respond to the environmental justice needs that are occurring on our world. Another mission center has organized what they're calling as a new expression of community entitled Footprints. And this new expression of the church is engaged in what they are calling community prayer walks. Community prayer walks are people coming together, intentionally going to a location and walking together, praying together for the issues of justice and needs in that community. And so what a beautiful way to actively live their concerns for the welfare of others and to model that hope and faith that they have to live that action of justice as they physically go out and walk and are present in the midst of the people. Another one that I would encourage the listeners online to search out, and that's the new expression of Community of Christ that has been launched here at the temple, entitled the Center for Living Water. And that's occurring here at the Community of Christ Temple in Independence, Missouri. And so this mission here in the USA is focused on providing spiritual transformation and peaceful living opportunities for people to engage in practice and action. So as things begin to open up more, there's been several things online that the Center for Living Waters has been doing, and even now during Lent, they're providing a Lenten a gathering or resource each week. But the participants, the vision is for participants to come together for personal spiritual practices, discernment, and community gatherings as a collective movement towards peace and justice in the community, but to allow that to flow out from the temple into the life of the church and communities. And again, the image of living water is that image of water moving and the presence of this, what's happening. And so, out of the team that's leading this new expression, this is one expression of the temple being alive and fulfilling its purpose at the pursuit of peace, reconciliation, and healing of the spirit. So I could go on with a number of other ones, but I hope that just gives a sense of some of the things that are happening out of the creative nature and sense of venture for people who have responded to this urging to live mission in different ways and to be out there. And I'm just really excited to see those expressions happening.
Thank you, my dear friend. This has been an exciting, inspiring conversation filled with good news and filled with challenges for each one of us to be the living water, to be the living expression of Jesus Christ in our own neighborhoods, in our families, and with our friends, and even with the strangers. So thank you, my dear brother and friend. And thank you, Coffee Buzz listeners, for joining our conversation. I hope that it has inspired you and challenged you to be that living water, that living expression. And Coffee Buzz listeners, please watch for next month's episode of Coffee Buzz. I'll be having a conversation with Prophet President Steve Vesey. Until then, blessings to you.
Thanks for listening to Project Zion Podcast. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or whatever podcast streaming service you use, and while you are there, give us a 5-star rating. Project Zion Podcast is sponsored by Latter-day Seeker Ministries of Community of Christ. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are of those speaking and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Latter-day Seeker Ministries or Community of Christ. The music has been graciously provided by Dave Hines.